Hi, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here for your next PB&J card class. And today I'll be making this card that you see here, and I'll be using Penny Black's Transparent Set Delicate Silhouettes and the Creative Die Made with Love, and both of these are from the new Bliss collection. And just a note, I'll have a full supply list at the end of the video. This will include the stamp numbers and names, die numbers and names, and all of the inks and everything used to create the card. So to begin, I'm working on Neenah Solar White cardstock. I wanted a nice smooth cardstock because I'm going to be putting distress inks on top. And I'm going to repeatedly stamp this flower image from the silhouette stamp set. These silhouettes are really great for the emboss resist technique. So I'm going to stamp these images going around the outer edge of the card. I rubbed an anti-static bag across the paper because I will be embossing, and I'm inking the stamp with Versamark ink. I'm using my Misty Stamp Positioning Tool, but you certainly would not need to use this for this technique. You could just put the stamps on an acrylic block. And I'm just moving those around, working fairly quickly so that the ink doesn't have time to dry before I sprinkle on my embossing powder. And then I'll just slide this up so I can position one down here on the bottom. So as I position these three floral impressions, try to just kind of add them in a triangular fashion, and that will give the card overall balance, and I can use them as a guide as I add other stamping around the outer edge. So I'm going to sprinkle on the white embossing powder, and then I will apply heat to set and come back and add some more stamping. So I'm so sorry, right now there's not a lot to see. It's a lot of white on white, but pretty soon you'll be able to see a whole lot more. So this little image is from that same set. And again, I'm just working around the outer edge of the card. Now that I have those three larger floral images, it's easier to go back in now and fill in with this smaller leaf. Excuse my head popping in and out there, just wanted to get a good look where I was putting that. And we'll get it stamped a couple of times up here at the top. And one more. And now I'm ready just to sprinkle this with the embossing powder. And then I'll also apply heat with my heat tool to set that. Now I'm ready to add my distress ink. So the first color I'm working with is Peacock Feathers, and then the following color will be Seedless Preserves. And like I said before, all of the stamps and colors and inks will be listed at the end of the video. I'm starting off of the edge and moving on in a circular motion, and I'm applying this Peacock Feathers down in sort of the bottom right hand corner of the card. Right now it's turned around, and I will go all the way up, but the darkest color will be down in that bottom right hand corner. It's always so fun when you start finally getting to see that stamping showing through. I always start light and then build up more and more color as I go. This way I never have to press too hard with the ink blending tool, which gives it a nice smooth look. And I have control over how the color will be. By starting light and just adding a little bit more ink at a time, then I never get too much on there right from the start. Now I'm going to put the Seedless Preserves over. This one again focused mostly in that bottom right hand corner. And I love these two inks together. You end up getting this really gorgeous purple and also a nice blue as they mix together. And same thing with this color. I'm starting light and then adding more and more layers to build up to a darker color. I'll remove the excess ink from the embossed areas using a baby wipe, and I just kind of stick my finger through there so I can just rub right over the stamped and embossed areas and not onto the background. Because distress inks do react with water, if you rub that damp baby wipe over the whole thing, it would affect the inking on the background. Now, once that's dry, I'm just deciding here where I want to put my stamp, and I realized here because of that embossing, the tray was just kind of sticking a little bit. So I'm just playing around here to get the magnets just right so that I can repeatedly stamp this. And the reason that I'm doing this in the Misty is because I want to build up the color. So this is the same color that we inked the background with, the Mermaid Lagoon. So one impression was not quite dark enough, but with the Misty I can just re-ink it and stamp it again and just deepen that color up a little bit. This stamp is from that same set, Delicate Silhouette, so there's a lot of variety within that set that you can mix and match all together to create sort of a garden scene. In the areas that are more lightly inked, I only needed to stamp it once, and the areas that have a darker background, I stamp it a couple of times, re-inking in between each impression. Just kind of turning that stamp, manipulating it so that it fills in those outer areas. And it's okay to stamp it right over the embossed areas because we're using Distress ink. We can wipe it right off the embossed area at the end. Now I'm using the Seedless Preserves because that's most of that color, background color has been inked with that. So by using that on the stamp, it'll show up. And I just spotted one more area here I wanted to add. And I'm ready to take this out of the Misty. And I'll just remove any of that excess stamping that went onto the embossed areas with that baby wipe. And I love how this gives the look that those other branches are behind the embossed ones. Now I'm going to use some gesso. This is by Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft, and this gives the sort of that glow around the outside. So all gessos have a different sort of opacity. I really like this one because it dries fairly light. I'm starting with a paintbrush off of the edge of my stamping and then working my way on with my brush strokes. This way I don't get a big blob of gesso right on the card, and I get a little bit of that paint off of the brush on my scratch paper before moving on to the card. Just use a swiping motion and lift up as I approach the center of the card so that it doesn't go all the way across. Also get the top and the corners. And I just love the way this gives that haze or sort of glow around the outer edge. And I let that dry, and then I did go back and add just another light layer. You can see that it dries very, very light. Now I wanted something that was much more opaque, so I'm using an acrylic paint, and just in a few spots, mostly where those large flowers were stamped, that way I keep that same triangular pattern that is very balanced and pleasing to the eye. I'm just putting a little paint on my finger and then just swiping it right on the edges. This just gives it a distressed feel without having to use a distress ink and still keeping things light with the white paint. You could also use a brush, but I just like the control that I have by using my finger. I went ahead and dried that with my heat gun, and now I want to add some piercing to the outer edges. And I just used this ruler by Tim Holtz. It has some piercing holes right along the edge. I put it on a piece of foam. You could use a mouse pad too, and I just poke those holes with a thumbtack, and it goes really fast. It seems like it might be labor intensive, but it really hardly takes a few seconds. And I'll do that all around the perimeter of the card. Now for my sentiment, I love this creative die. This is called Made with Love from Penny Black, and I'm inking it with the same colors that I did the background. I'm going to layer one that's a nice dark color, and then I'm going to put a white one on top, slightly offset, and this just adds more dimension to that die cut and gives it a touch of a shadow on the background. And I think that'll make a little bit more sense once you see the card put together. So I'm just looking there if it's dark enough, and I decided I want to go quite a bit darker. Now you can see that I've glued that die cut down, and now this is just a white one. And this one I cut from watercolor cardstock, so it's just a little bit thicker. And when I glue this down, I'm going to slightly offset it over the one that's already been inked and glued onto the card. And I like to use liquid glue for this because it gives me a little time and a little wiggle room as I glue that down. And there you can see how layering those two die cuts just adds a little bit of touch of shadow and dimension. To finish things off, I just mounted my emboss panel to my note card. And here's a look at that final card. Another way to alter this design is to do the same thing but just use different colors for the ink. On this one I've used Fired Brick, Spice Marmalade, and Fossilized Amber Distress inks. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, and Instagram, and I'll link to all of those down in the YouTube description box below. And stay tuned here. Here's that list of supplies for everything used in creating this card.